Hey guys, it's Faye from SolarFlow and I am back with an all-new video. Today's topic is a deep dive behind the veil energy read on two singers, one by the name of Chris Brown and another by the name of Rihanna. So we're going to be exploring their very public relationship, what was going on behind the scenes, and what had led to the very public breakdown of the relationship when Chris Brown had physically assaulted Rihanna. So if that sounds good to you, please stick around, and if not, I will catch you at another video. Now, for anybody that is not familiar with who these two are, I did visit their Wikipedia pages because I didn't know that much about them, to be honest. Chris Brown, I know he's a singer. Rihanna, I know she's a singer. I know she has her Fenty Beauty line. But I actually did learn quite a bit about them by visiting their Wikipedia page. And I'm just gonna touch upon this before I actually go on to the meat and bones of what this video is primarily about, which is their relationship and the breakdown of their relationship. But to start with, Chris Brown was born in 1989, and he is an American singer, songwriter, dancer, and regarded as one of the most prominent R&B artists, and has been accredited with being an evolver of the genre, and he is referred to by his contemporaries as the king of R&B. Rihanna, on the other hand, is a singer from the Barbados, and she is a businesswoman, right? She has her Fenty Beauty line, actress, and a songwriter, and she is widely regarded as one of the most prominent singers of the 21st century. Now, Rihanna had kind of risen to fame out of nowhere with a song by the name of Umbrella. Very, very catchy tune, to which she had actually won a Grammy for it. Now, that is saying something, because for an artist that is being mentored by Jay-Z, and wins a Grammy with her very, very first public hit is notable. That's gonna play a very, very teeny tiny part in all of this. Because as we've kind of been exploring and discussing, people don't really get to be a household name, and they don't get to have the kind of career success and recognition of a Chris Brown and a Rihanna if they have not joined some sort of club above them. So it will come into play, but again, I want to remind you it's going to be a very small part of this video. The main portion of this video is in exploring the relationship between them. So they met in 2005. However, they did not start dating one another until 2007. They did split up in 2009 when Chris Brown had physically assaulted Rihanna. It was on the eve of the Grammy Awards, and they had left some sort of a Grammy party, a pre-Grammy party. They had gotten into some sort of an argument which led to the physical altercation. Now, my understanding is they were also supposed to be performing in the Grammys the next day, and that had to quickly be scrubbed, because if you remember, or even if you don't remember, you know the internet holds all secrets and forgets none. So you can easily Google and see what she looked like. She was in pretty rough shape. There was no way to sugarcoat what had happened to her. She certainly was in no position to be performing. Now, the after effects of that was that Chris Brown had received 5 years probation as well as community service, and he had received domestic violence counseling. They had a restraining order in place. However, in 2011, Rihanna's attorneys had gone back to the court and had requested changing the restraining order to include peaceful communication between the two of them. So that already is going to let us know that this was something that she was interested in, or why else would she have had her attorneys go back to alter the terms of the restraining order? And they did reconcile shortly thereafter, and I believe they were together for about another 1-year period before they had ultimately broken up for good. So let's see what their energy had wanted to share with me. So Chris Brown and Rihanna had a very tempestuous relationship. Even before any of the abuse had started, there was a lot of spice between the two of them. A lot of spice and a lot of flirtation. And even very early on in the relationship, it was shown to me as Chris playing hot and cold with Rihanna. Now, Rihanna either did not recognize this for being a red flag, or I would even say more accurately, didn't really care that this was a red flag. And Chris would play hot, and Chris would play cold, and he would disappear for a couple of days on end, or he would ignore her calls, and then he would come back, burning hotter than the sun, full of compliments and adoration, and she got sucked back into the cycle all over again. But there was undeniable chemistry between them, and also from Chris's point of view, there was an undeniable pull connecting him to Rihanna. So this is an indication when there's any sort of a pull tying or connecting people together, especially when they very, very early on have just met, this is some indication of a past life connection. So Chris Brown and Rihanna, one could say, were actually reunited in this lifetime with different names and different bodies, but it's a continuation of some past life connection that these two have had. Predominantly stronger from Chris's point of view than Rihanna's, and I'm going to discuss why this is. Now, it was, in the beginning, it was good. It wasn't great, but it was really good. So let's first pause here and let's discuss why it was good in the beginning and why it is that when Chris was burning hot and cold, Rihanna would still take him back. So we're going to start by looking into Chris's energy. Now, what was shown to me about Chris is that he is not a happy person. Not genuinely, not truly. He's not a happy person. There is an electric current that runs under his skin and it thrums at all times. One could actually say that electric current is the vibrational equivalent of the sound that you may hear outside my window, because it's real life over here. And this electric current was shown to me as sometimes purring like a cat, especially if Chris was happy. However temporary and fleeting that happiness may have been, sometimes it would thrum so strongly and so powerful that it would make his heart race and he would see spots with his vision. And sometimes that would keep him up for days on end because that thrumming was so powerful and all-consuming. And sometimes that electric current would feel depleted and empty, and it was only then and at that time that he would be able to find sleep. Because he was shown to me as having bouts of sleeplessness, especially when that vibrational thrum was so powerful that it literally would prevent him from sleeping, where he would stay up for days on end, but then where he would be depleted and he could sleep deeply and sleep like the dead. Now, when he was playing hot and cold with Rihanna, I want you first to understand that when he was cold, that wasn't because he was energetically depleted and he had fallen asleep and he had forgotten to text her or forgot to call her and tell her, hey, yo, I'm tired and I'm going to sleep. You might not hear from me until tomorrow or tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to remind you the terminology that I used, which was to say he was playing hot and cold, which means it was very intentional and deliberate on his part. So it wasn't like, hey, yo, I fell asleep, I forgot to hit up my girl. It was where he knew she was expecting to hear from him, or he knew where he was expected to be in contact with her, and he chose not to. He was ghosting her, if you will, maybe before the term was even as popular as it is today. Now, Chris was also shown to me as being a high-functioning, if not highly on edge, anxiety sufferer. I mean, look at it also this way. He had an energetic current running under his skin that would sometimes keep him up for days on end. That sounds like it would cause anxiety for anybody. But the anxiety was so acute that it always left him on edge. And even before his physical altercation with Rihanna, he was known to go off the handle and to lose his cool. Which is another way of saying he has a very short fuse. And according to him, I am not giving him a pass, but this is according to him and what he chose to share with me. He sometimes felt like his body controlled him and not the other way around. Again, self-reporting, probably reported this way with the intention of giving the impression he's not really a bad guy. He just lost, his body just took him on a ride and it was something he didn't have control over. Okay? Self-reporting, 2% personal opinion. This is where I say we are all adults and we all are meant to take responsibility for the choices that we make, and we are also meant to take responsibility for the actions that we create. So, self-reporting, probably with the intention of creating this illusion of the fact that he was not actually in control of himself. So again, yes, he had claimed that sometimes it felt like his body controlled him and not the other way around. But in reality, him reporting this sensation was due to the fact that he had a lot of unresolved trauma, and therefore all of the pent-up energy of that unresolved trauma manifested in him being full of anxiety. And in the absence of healthy coping mechanisms, his way of dealing with the stress and the anxiety was to snap. And he would then, in fact, feel better afterwards, but it was quite destructive, even post-Rihanna. But because he was young, wealthy, and successful, those around him were shown to me as having put up with it, and therefore he was never actually, in fact, encouraged to hold himself accountable or to get actual help. So there was a lot of bad behavior enabling going on around him. Now, Rihanna, for her part, was shown to me as also having a lot of unresolved trauma. Surprise, surprise, like attracts like. This is not a case where one person was healthy and one person was traumatized, and somehow the traumatized individual was a vibrational match for the healthy partner. No, that's not the way it works. I remind you, let me get some crystals and show you the way that these things actually work. Real life over here, as unprofessional as it can sometimes be. It also makes it more entertaining. Let's be honest. All right, I am holding in my hand 2 different crystals. For the sake of this video, we're going to pretend that these are 2 magnets. Because if they were in fact magnets, what would happen when they are both turned into the same polarity is when you would bring them close together, they would come together, connect, and make an audible sound. Because like attracts like. But Let's say you take one of these pretend magnets and you turn one to the opposite polarity. What's going to happen is they're now no longer going to be attracting one another. They're going to be a repellent for one another. So when this one comes in, it's actually going to push this one away. It comes in, it pushes them away. But if you turn this one back to the original polarity that it was on, when you would bring these two together, they would be attracted to and drawn to another. They would connect. Because like attracts like. Because things that are the same polarity and the same vibration come together. But if you change the vibration of one of them, they're no longer an energetic match. So this is not a case of where one person was energetically healthy and had no unresolved trauma, or even if they had trauma, they had gone to therapy and they had gone to counseling and they had learned healthy coping mechanisms, and somehow the unhealthy partner, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, had infiltrated their high vibration around them. That's not the way it works. So these were two people that both had unresolved trauma that were thus then an energetic match for one another. And that's why they came together and had a relationship. Now, what was also shown to me about Rihanna is that her trauma manifested rather differently than Chris's. So for Chris's, the trauma was manifested through this thrum that he always felt vibrating underneath his skin and in his body. Not so for Rihanna. Rihanna was actually veiled by her trauma because her trauma was something she didn't wish to remember. So it was, if you will, in her method to get away from it, she was further veiled by the trauma that she had experienced. So this had manifested with Rihanna energetically showing up as a mouse. She would shut down. So whereas Chris's trauma response was to fight, Rihanna's was to freeze. Because there's 4 F's when faced with some sort of a traumatizing event or a life-altering event. There's 4 F's. Fight, flight, fawn, freeze. What are they? Fight. Some people go into a fight response. They're going to fight their way out of it. Some people are going to go into a flight response. Flight, they're going to run the fuck away from it. Some people are going to fawn, which is faint. And another way of saying faint is they're going to disassociate from what's going on around them. And the 4th trauma response is to freeze. You energetically get frozen where you are, either mentally, emotionally, or even literally. You can get frozen in where you stand. And that's why sometimes people don't run the fuck away from something that's happening to them. They're experiencing some sort of a trauma that their brain cannot reconcile. They will literally really freeze there. Which is, yes, why sometimes if people report there's a pow pow at their work, they hear the gunshots going off, they don't run away. Their mind cannot process that they're actually hearing pow pow at work. They freeze because of it. So Chris's trauma response was to fight. Rihanna's trauma response was to freeze. So they were energetically polar opposites of one another, and this is what led them to, in this incarnation, energetically feel very drawn to one another. Because with Chris, Rihanna felt that thrum vibrating in or around him, and that felt like power to her, which is another way of saying subconsciously, she observed that Chris was more overtly, let's say, of an energetic fire nature. If something bothered him, he didn't just sit back and zip it and endure it. He would let that displeasure be known. So in a subconscious point of view, from Rihanna's perspective, This looked like somebody that was on the other side of their trauma because they were fully functioning. That felt powerful to her because in her perspective, subconsciously, it felt like he had dealt with his trauma and he was able to be action-oriented because of it. Because Rihanna had not dealt with her trauma, she had suppressed her trauma, was thus then further reinforcing the veil that she experienced, and was more prone to freezing and being a mouse. So when she felt something happen to her, she would shut down, which is why she was drawn energetically to somebody like Chris, because he was action-oriented when something bothered him. So that felt like power to her, where she felt disempowered and of a more disempowered nature. And she liked the way that felt, to be around somebody that she perceived to be more powerful than her. For Chris, Rihanna felt safe and not at all threatening because, again, she was prone to freezing and becoming the mouse. So he could be the more assertive partner in the relationship. So she was not at all threatening to him. And since he was always so riled up by his unresolved trauma, when he was with her, he felt a sense of temporary ease. But that only lasted so long or until the newness of the relationship wore off. And then Chris, once again, was back to himself. So whereas this was on a soul level, a soul recognition that Chris recognized with Rihanna, Rihanna did not at all recognize this with Chris because she was veiled to that. The reason that she was drawn to him in the 3D was because he was more of an overt partner, which felt like power to her. And because she was approaching the relationship with a lot of unhealed and unresolved trauma that left her feeling disempowered, being around somebody that she perceived to be more powerful felt like power to her. Not also understanding that this is somebody that had his own unresolved trauma, and that unresolved trauma has a way of rearing its ugly head. So yes, in the beginning, it was good, but it wasn't shown to me as being great. So she had some sort of a romance period at the beginning that was enough to really draw her in and to leave some sort of an imprint on her, where she felt she was seeing the best of who Chris was. And that was enough to keep her there, even if early on he was playing hot and cold. And again, him playing hot and cold wasn't like that thrum had been all used up and he was tired and he was going to sleep. He knew damn well she expected him to contact her, and he wouldn't. Because he was out doing other things that he deemed to be more important than his partner, Rihanna. So yes, he was playing hot and cold with her. Now, he also felt powerful that after he had gone through a period of being particularly cold with her, and maybe ghosting her for a couple of days on end, where he would sidle back into her and he would turn on the charm to its fullest expression, and he would suck her right the fuck back in. He felt powerful when he would do that, which is why, in fact, he did it. Now, Rihanna at this point had shared with me that it could be dreamy. It wasn't all hot and cold with, ample, undeniable chemistry between the two of them. No. There were genuinely periods where it felt dreamy to her. Like when he would value system, this is what she shared with me, when he would buy her an extravagant present for absolutely no reason, or he would take her out to an incredible dinner and give her all of his attention. Because there were so many times when she felt his attention was diverted elsewhere. But even then, Chris was actually grooming Rihanna. She just didn't know it yet. because again, her trauma had veiled her to it. Because sometimes, yes, he would vanish for periods at a time and ghost her, if you will. And these periods always left her feeling confused, and she would question herself at these times in trying to ascertain if it was due to something that she had done. Instead of recognizing what he was doing wasn't healthy, she would internalize it and she would blame herself. Then he would come back fast and strong and hard, and he would woo her all over again. And if she was honest with herself, even at that time, she felt like she had been strapped into a roller coaster she didn't remember even getting onto. That was only if she was honest with herself. Which is another way of saying she wasn't. She didn't want to be honest with herself, because being with Chris and feeling the power that came off of him felt like power to her. And it was something she herself didn't feel that she could generate or experience. So she would take the energetic scraps of the power she felt from him. Then what was shown to me, because these things have a way of advancing. If someone's playing hot and cold, that's an indication it's probably not going to be a healthy relationship. So what was the next iteration of this unhealthy relationship? It was shown to me that Chris would take her out, and even at the point that he would pick her up, he would be a little bit iffy with his behavior. So he might be giving her one-word answers. How are you? Fine. She would lean in to kiss him, and he wouldn't be warm about it. He wouldn't like lean in to kiss her back. He wouldn't be affectionate. He would let her kiss him, but that was it. He wouldn't reciprocate the affection. So obviously this was going on, and she was realizing something was up with Chris. And she would try to engage him and try to understand what was going on with Chris. And he would say nothing. But he would be rather cold. But he wouldn't say anything. Or sometimes he would be playing hot and cold, and then halfway through the date, he would just start to like ignore her. Or maybe when it was even like on the way to him taking her back home, he would just start to ignore her. This thoroughly freaked her the fuck out. So she would again try to engage with him, and she would say, Chris, what's going on? Why are you mad? Why are you upset? And he would say something to her like, you don't know? And she would say, I don't know. Know what? And he would say, how can you pretend not to know when you're the reason that I'm so upset? And she'd be like, what the fuck are you upset about? You seemed fine when you picked me up. It was crazy making for her. And I was actually shown where she had gotten out of the car and she was standing there looking like completely lost and forlorn, like he had dropped her off at the completion of a date. She was standing there lost and forlorn, and she tapped on the window, and he rolled down the passenger side window, and he was like, what? And she's like, Chris, don't leave this way. Please, don't fight with me. He would roll the window up and he would drive the fuck away. And then he would ignore her for 2 days on end. And then he would come back in as if nothing had ever happened. Or the other way in which this date would end is with him dropping her off, her begging him at the conclusion of the date not to just leave her there, not to just drop her off, not to just drive home. Come inside, let's talk about it. They would talk about it, and then there would be a lot of screaming, a lot of passion, at least from one side. It would be Chris expressing the fire inside of him that was a result of the thrumming that he felt because of the unresolved trauma playing out in his life. She would resort to her unresolved trauma energetic blueprint, which would be freeze, she would just sit there. He would fucking just yell at her, go to fucking town on her, make her feel like fucking shit. She would end up crying. Then they'd end up having crazy good makeup sex. Not a recipe for a healthy relationship. And it was only after they would have crazy good makeup sex that the anxiety that she would feel from the way the date had gone would start to dissipate. And then the cheating started. But from Rihanna's point of view, it was as if Chris wasn't actually trying to hide it. Ding, ding, ding. She was correct. He was not actually, in fact, trying to hide it. Because he would come to pick her up and his car would smell like another girl's perfume. And she'd be like, what the fuck, Chris? Who is in your car? And he would totally gaslight her and he would tell her, nobody, I don't smell anything. What the fuck are you talking about? Or she would open up the glove box and she would find another girl's lipstick in the glove box. He wasn't trying to hide it. He would just gaslight her. And she'd be like, whose fucking lipstick is this? And he'd be like, I don't fucking know. It's not mine. I'm not seeing anyone else, Rihanna. It's no one else's. And she would confront him and he would, of course, deny it. And she, of course, couldn't prove it. They weren't together when he was with somebody else, so she didn't know. But she knew. And then the physical abuse started. Not overt. Slowly and very, very subtly. So again, it was shown to me as maybe being, if they were having an argument, he would push her, shove her in one of her shoulders, she'd take a step back. Or maybe they're having some sort of an argument and she's getting really worked up and he would reach for her hands and he would grab onto them and he would hold them so tight that it actually would hurt her. Then it was shown to me as where he was being overly aggressive with her body in an argument. So this isn't where he was pushing her shoulder. This might be where he would get so angry he would like come up in her face and he would tower over her and he would scream in her face, scaring the fucking bejesus out of her. And then he would put both of his hands on her shoulders and he would give her a good mighty shove. And then it was one little slap across the face, just one. Because these things progress. And then it was just one punch in the jaw, not the eyes, but just one. Because the really bad incident that had happened in 2009 prior to the Grammys wasn't the first time. Because things like this happening, big assaults, it's never the first time. It's actually a slow progression and expansion of what was there all along, slithering like a snake concealed in tall grass. You can hear the snake. You can have a general idea of where its location is. Maybe you can't see it, but you know it's there. Or maybe as it's slithering along, you get a glimpse of it, but then it moves on and it's concealed by some more tall grass. You get a glimpse of it, and then maybe again you don't see it for some time, but just because you don't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. So there was a large culmination of this unhealthy dynamic between the two of them that was a result of the unresolved trauma these two experienced that had brought them together and had laid the blueprint and the groundwork in what had actually kept them together, despite the evidence of the unhealthy nature between the two of them. Starting with hot and cold, ghosting, playing hot and cold on dates, driving off and leaving her stranded, cheating on her and letting it be known that he was cheating on her, and then little small instances of physical abuse. That was the progression in their relationship. And the very large, overt culmination of it was the event that had happened prior to the Grammys, where I don't know if I can say that, he did some damage to her face. Again, you can Google it. You can find photos of it. She had a black eye. She had like black and blue marks on her face. And I think I had even read that he started to bite her. And he was like repeatedly biting her. And she said he had tried to kick her. This was a very large, overt explosion of hostility and aggression on his part, directed at Rihanna. So yes, obviously at that time, they did break up. And she did receive the restraining order against Chris. And they were broken apart for a great number of years. Now, this is not to say that during that time, other people were not reaching out to Rihanna on Chris's behalf, which, here's the thing. It's kind of technically a violation of a restraining order, but they would never say, Chris asked me to reach out to you. Were they friends of Chris? Sure. But they would just say things like, Chris is so sorry. Chris loves you so much. You know he never meant to hurt you. He just wants to talk to you so he can explain what had happened. So, in essence, during the time that they were apart, Rihanna was never actually entirely free of him. Because during that time, there was a great number of people in her ear telling her what Chris wanted her to know. So he was still, one could say, he still obtained a great level of control over her. He still had a great level of influence over her. However, there was one person that had even more influence over her at that time, that was kind of, if you will, shuttling her along in a different kind of direction. Was it a direction that she herself wanted to go in? Doesn't fucking matter. It was someone that had a preeminent position above her in the club that was kind of, if you will, crafting this very real catastrophic event into ratings gold for her. Because what do we know also happened after that time period? She had done the talk show circuit. And she had talked with a great number of people about her experience, and it seemed almost as if she was going to be an advocate speaking out against domestic abuse. Was it because she wanted to? No. What she actually wanted to happen was to brush this under the rug and to forget about it and to move the fuck on. Because that was her MO. That was her energetic blueprint when trauma would happen to her. She would turn into a mouse, she would suppress it, she would veil it, not deal with it, and she would move the fuck on, carrying all of that trauma with her, which would then in turn do what? Make her an energetic match for another traumatized individual. So because Rihanna is somebody that is in the club, right? Because again, you don't get to be a household name and you don't get to win a Grammy on your very, very first album and your very, very first hit song if you're not in the club. But she was mentored, or maybe I think even discovered, by Jay-Z. And we know Jay-Z be mighty high up in the club. So at the time that this incident had occurred between the two of them, in case you were wondering, this is not something that was scripted. No, the fuck was this not something that was scripted. This was an expression of unresolved trauma exploding, bubbling up to the surface and exploding like a volcano. But the powers that be above her in the club, ever the masters of public perception, were seeing this as a golden opportunity to craft her public persona in a different sort of a way. So after this so-called beatdown, she went on TV shows, and a great number of them, more than one. And she had spoken out about this and about her experiences. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because when you are in the club, you do not necessarily get to be the arbiter of your public persona. You do not necessarily get to sing the kind of songs that you want to sing. You don't get to necessarily dress the way that you want to dress. You don't necessarily get to perform the way that you want to perform. This was just another expression of her being owned and operated. Because she had spoken to Diane Sawyer, and she had told Diane Sawyer that domestic violence is not a subject to so-called sweep under the rug, when in actuality, that's exactly what Rihanna wanted to do, but she couldn't. So because she was being forced to talk about something she did not want to talk about, because it was going against her own energetic blueprint to the way she dealt with trauma, which was to ignore it and to brush it under the rug, every time she had to go out and she had to talk about it, because that was what was expected of her in the terms and service of her agreement with the club, she was in fact being re-traumatized every single time. Did those above her care? No. This was ratings gold. They were going to craft her image exactly. It was a further interpretation and expression of how they were going to craft her image. Now, a very notable event actually happened. And I remember this because I remember seeing the interview. And I want to say that this was with Matt Lauer on the Today Show, because I remember seeing this live when it had happened, and the exchange had basically gone like this. And why am I bringing it up? It is incredibly notable to the way in which images are crafted and the way in which these things and information and the exchange of information in the club is retained. So I remember watching this interview live, and I think it was with Rihanna and Matt Lauer. And I remember Matt Lauer talking to Rihanna and saying, do you know the average amount of time it takes for a survivor of domestic abuse to leave their partner? And he had said something like 5 to 6, right? He's like, it takes the average survivor 5 to 6 times of trying to leave before they leave for good. And I remember her correcting him and saying, actually, it's more like 8 to 9 attempts. Why is this notable? Because here's the way it works. It's not like Matt Lauer had gone on the internet and Googled it, and he went to a different website than she had gone to, and therefore he had different information than her. It's not the way it works. When any time a celebrity is being interviewed on whether it's a night show or it's a day show and it's a talk show, there's always going to be somebody, whether it's the host that's going to be speaking to them or it's a staff of the host, they always go and they do a pre-interview. They go and they talk to them. So let's say they're not talking about domestic abuse. Let's say they're there to promote their latest movie. So either the host is going to go, or more likely it's going to be a staff member of the host. They're going to talk to that celebrity and they're going to say, so you're here to promote your new movie, and this is what it's called, and we're going to talk about these things, and is there anything else that you want the host to ask you about, anything else that you want to discuss? It's kind of like a pre-interview prior to the interview. That's when you're just talking about something light and fluffy, like promoting a movie. This is not light and fucking fluffy. So even more so, this is an instance where the staff are going to go and talk to Rihanna. Probably even the person that interviewed her was going to go and talk to Rihanna. And they were going to go through in advance every single question that he was going to ask her. So she knew in advance, probably with her PR machine, exactly how she was going to answer those questions. So this is not a case of he just went to a different search engine and he got different information than hers. This was done intentionally, and it was done in an effort to put her forth as being the more informed person in the interview. The person that was interviewing her was not even as well informed as she was. So this was done with very much the intentionality of making her look a certain way. PR machine working in overdrive. They were going to make her look as if she was in fact more well educated on the subject than the man that was even interviewing her, because they wanted to make her look as if she took this very, very seriously. Because at that time, the powers that be above her were in fact even thinking about not just having her go out onto the talk show circuit and discussing these things, but very much having her actually be an advocate and a spokesperson speaking out against these things. That was the intention anyway, because behind the scenes, they were running all sorts of focus groups, and they were looking into her persona and her presentation and running polls to see if this was a viable option for her. So one such piece in that potential puzzle was putting her forth as if she was in fact the expert on the matter. It was orchestrated. It was done by design, where he was going to state the wrong information so that she could correct him and appear to be the more knowledgeable one. So tell me how talk show hosts are not just an arm of the cabal, and they're there to disseminate some sort of propaganda, even if it's false propaganda meant to make a celebrity look better than they actually are, or more knowledgeable than they in fact might be. It wasn't that she was in fact more knowledgeable. It was just that she was parroting talking points that she was given to say in advance. Because again, she knew what she was meant to say. They got the questions. She probably had her PR representative sitting next to her, and they were rehearsing all of this. But this was done because her image was under review to see if they thought they could make her an advocate or a spokesperson speaking out in defense of so-called battered women. They were spinning this real-life event in her favor by crafting a certain kind of an image, while also re-traumatizing her, because this is not something she wanted to talk about. She did not want to go on TV and talk about all of this, and was in fact mortified that people knew this about her and that she had to go out and even talk about these things happening to her. Not her MO. She wanted to suppress this and further veil herself from the trauma that she herself was not yet prepared to face. But because she was so traumatized after this event happening, she was in fact remarkably energetically pliable and did what she was told. Now, she did in fact want all of this to go away, and she did well and true want to forget about all of this. And she also wanted the world to forget about all of this. She did not want to be any sort of an advocate or spokesperson for something so horrible as what had happened to her. So what happened? Because she was never actually entirely free of Chris, because he always had his friends whispering in her ears. And she didn't want to be no spokesperson for battered women, because if she was going to become a spokesperson for them, then that meant she was one. And she did not want to self-identify as a battered woman. Convenient time, one could say, for her to break free of those shackles of what she was being considered to be, a spokesperson. And the best way to get out of that was to get back into a relationship with Chris Brown. Convenient, one could say. Convenient because she had never been free from his energy and his influence along the way anyway. Because those friends were always, and certainly at first, for the first couple of years, maybe she didn't even respond. Or she would just be like, shut the fuck up, I don't want to hear it. But they didn't ever really give up. And at a certain point, she started to respond to those that were reaching out to her. And when they were telling her, Chris was sorry, she wanted to believe it. Because if she did, then this whole ordeal, not just the beating, but the whole ordeal of her speaking about this and then perhaps even being put forth onto the world stage as being some sort of an advocate, speaking out on behalf of these battered women, she could put all of that behind her as well, and she could just move on. Unfortunately, her idea of moving on, in this case, meant getting back together with Chris. Because if she got back together with him, then could she really be an advocate or a spokesperson? When she went on TV and she had corrected somebody and said, actually, it's not 5 to 6 times, it's 8 to 9 times, meant to make her look as if she was the expert. Riddle me this, Batman, if you're such a fucking expert, why the fuck are you getting back together with him? Because she wasn't an expert and she didn't want to be. And this was the best way of not being a spokesperson. And it was also the best way of denying what had happened to her was as bad as it genuinely was. So she started texting the friends back. And she allowed them to be an intermediary between her and Chris until A, she got more comfortable with the idea of perhaps reconciling with him, but B, more importantly, they were always reminding her, we're happy to be the intermediary, but here's the thing. At a certain time, Chris is going to want to tell you this himself. But Chris can't, because you have a restraining order in place. And enough times of this going back and forth and her being reminded and then her getting fucking text messages from the PR company saying, Jay-Z wants to meet with you. He met with another control group. Or there's another talk show host we want you to talk to about all of these things. It was enough. So she had her attorneys go to the judge to alter the terms of the restraining order so Chris could contact her once again. And you may by now know that resulted in them getting back together, because I shared that at the top of the video. So initially, she was content to have those friends acting as the intermediary. but with mounting pressure of how her likeness was going to be used on the world stage, which was not in alignment with the way she herself wanted to live. And in having enough of these people whispering in her ear and telling her how sorry Chris was and how much he wanted to get back, he wanted to at least talk to her. He wanted to at least explain what had happened, but he couldn't. That was all the impetus she needed to have the terms of the restraining order altered so he could contact her. And he knew all the right things to say because he always knew all along how to sidle up to her. And even if he had been playing hot and cold and he had been ignoring her, he already knew exactly what persona he had to be to hoover her back into his life. Now, at the time that they had in fact gotten back together, what she had said when asked about it by reporters, or if she was promoting a new album or a music video, and she was asked about getting back together with him, she had said, if it's a mistake, it was hers to mistake. It was her mistake to make. And she was also espouting how he was the love of her life. Really? You're a fucking child, but okay. It was convenient for her to perceive him as the love of her life, because how then else could she forgive him and get back together with him? But the reason that she actually was saying, if it's a mistake, it's hers to make, was because according to her, there was, quote, a parade of people running their mouth at her, end quote, about it being such. So many fucking people were in her face telling her, don't fucking do this, it's a mistake. But maybe some of them weren't saying it from the personal point of view. They were saying it from the point of view, this is a mistake, you're gonna fucking tank your image. And she's like, well, guess the fuck what? If it's a mistake, it's mine to make. So that was her way of getting out ahead of it. Because how do you take the wind out of somebody's sail than by approaching exactly what it is they're saying, and you're not denying it, but you're actually owning it. So she owned it. She was like, yeah, maybe it is a mistake, but it's mine to fucking make. Because according to her, she was young and in love, and it was her mistake to make. On his part, in case you were wondering, why did Chris want to get back together with her? For image purposes. Because if Rihanna agreed to get back together with him, then it would satisfy this idea that he actually, in fact, was not really a bad person, right? He wasn't a bad person. He certainly wasn't an abuser. Not one per se. But that this was a one-time event where he had just temporarily lost his temper, and that was it. Because if he was really so bad and if he was really an abuser, surely Rihanna wouldn't get back together with him. Not when she had already done the rounds on TV and she had been so eloquently spoken about it and had been so well informed about the role of the abuser. Surely if he was an abuser, she wouldn't get back together with him. And Rihanna really wanted to believe that as well, because she could not accept the idea that Chris actually was an abuser, because that would then call into question all of the decisions she had made along the way in the early days of their relationship, in which she had overlooked all of those red flags. And she didn't want to. She didn't want to go back and revisit that. She wanted to suppress it and move on. She didn't want to unpack her trauma and deal with it to make sure that she wasn't going to be re-traumatized again later on in another unhealthy relationship. She didn't want to. It was ugly. It hurt. And also, if she accepted the fact that Chris really was in fact an abuser, then that would also in fact make her a battered woman. And this was simply no truth that she could accept about herself. Because all of her judgment would have to be called into question. And she couldn't look back at all the bad decisions that she had made coming from a truly disempowered state. So she wanted to pretend as if she was going into this being fully empowered, because that was easier than going back and looking at the disempowered version of Rihanna, the deeply traumatized and wounded version of Rihanna. So it's kind of like the lies we tell ourselves. These were the lies that Rihanna told herself to make her decision to get back together with him more palatable. But Chris didn't really have to tell himself any lies, because he never self-identified as an abuser, and certainly none of the people around him in his posse never asked him to be accountable for his behavior or his actions. So it went unchecked and built up and got stronger. So this was just business as usual for Chris. But it behooved him to get back together with her, because if he did, this could only be good for his image. And sure, he never really fully ever let her out of his control anyway. He had all those friends for years whispering in her ear. He never fully let go either. And he was more than happy to hoover her right the fuck back in and pick up right where they left off. Because surely he wasn't an abuser in that case. And that worked out fine. That little lie worked out fine for him, and it worked out fine for her as well. Now, what was shown to me is when they had in fact gotten back together, they did take it slow. Both of them, interestingly enough, were shown to me as being on their best behavior at first. Because again, I'm going to remind you of the lies she was telling herself at that time. And one of those lies, one of the mental gymnastics that she was doing to explain away what had actually happened on the night when he had actually physically assaulted her, wasn't that he was in fact an abuser, but it was that he just lost his cool and he lost his temper. And again, not holding him accountable, because she was enabling him as well. But she was enabling him coming from a place of disempowerment because of her own unresolved trauma, I remind you. I'm not blaming the victim here. I'm just saying that on an energetic level, the reason that now she was willing to be on her best behavior was because she couldn't ask him to take the responsibility. Because if he took the responsibility, then it meant that he was an abuser. But by her taking on some of the blame and saying, at least to herself, well, I was really needling him. I was really on his case and giving him a really hard time about the cheating, which I didn't even have any evidence that he was cheating. Okay, the car smelled like perfume. He could have loaned it out to somebody and that guy picked up his girl. Like, I want you just to really get a sense of the mental gymnastics she was doing in order to make sense of what had happened to her so she could get back into a relationship with him instead of addressing her unresolved trauma. She was literally thinking, yeah, he really could have loaned his car out to a friend in his posse and that guy had picked up a girl. And the perfume that smelled wasn't from a girl that Chris had picked up, it was from that girl. Same thing with the lipstick, and that's why he didn't know about it. The lies we tell ourselves, the lies that Rihanna told herself, so she could move the fuck on and get back together with her abuser, instead of resolving her trauma. So yes, they both played it cool at first. Her accepting some level of responsibility and blame that she too had been at fault in provoking him and complaining about the cheating. So now, even if she saw red flags, guess what she wasn't going to do? She sure as hell wasn't going to act on it this time, even if she knew better. Because then the facade of the palace of lies that she had built around her for her to fortify herself in, brick by brick, that castle was going to come down to the ground. And then she was going to be left laid bare and exposed to the lies that she was telling herself. But Chris, too, was on his best behavior. Because from his point of view, it gave him the opportunity to flex. He was flexing a different part of himself that he, in fact, didn't even know that he had inside. This was the grown-up, more mature version of Chris, the one that could play it cool even if he wasn't feeling cool. It was just another facade. It was just another mask that Chris was slipping on. Now, what was shown to me is the first time they had in fact had sex after getting back together was a turning point for Rihanna. And here's why. It was not that he had done anything wrong per se. It was just that she was left feeling rather alone after the completion of the sex. It was just a feeling that he was there, but he wasn't really there. His body was there, but Chris was really somewhere else at that time. He was with her, but not really with her. Thus, even though he was physically with her, she still felt alone. But here's the thing. Although he hadn't done anything wrong, and he was on his best behavior, and she was taking part of the responsibility for the physical altercation, at least in her own mind, even with this realization at the conclusion of them having sex, that he wasn't really there with her, and that she felt alone and she felt lonely when she was in the presence of her boyfriend. She had already made the choice. She had already made the mistake, if you will, that she had said, if I'm making a mistake, at least it's mine to make. She had already committed to it by breaking free of the confines of how her image was going to be crafted, that she didn't want it to be crafted. Because if she had to accept that she was in fact a battered woman, there's not more than one of her. If she had to accept the fact that she was a battered woman, then that would in fact mean she had to stop taking the responsibility. And that meant that he was in fact her abuser. And that meant that she in fact had made some really fundamental bad decisions along the way when she had seen all those red flags. And again, she didn't want to. So she had already made the mistake and the choice, if you will, to get back together with him. So she knew she couldn't turn around now and stop. She was pot committed. So she had to continue, or at least from her perspective, she felt like she had to continue to go along with it. And this actually felt way more comfortable to her because she was swallowing down all of her self-loathing, all of the red flags, and pretending everything was all right. Just like she had the very first go-around with Chris. However, when they did ultimately break up, approximately 1 year later, it was without a dramatic ending to the relationship. And supposedly they're still rather supportive of one another because the lies they tell themselves. He's not her abuser. They ended on amicable terms, and they can still be supportive of one another's careers, rather than confront the unresolved trauma and wounding that had brought these two together on an energetic level in the first place. So on a soul level, these two actually had come into this incarnation to work through the woundings that they had experienced in previous incarnations. It was a second opportunity, if you will, to be triggered by something, but instead of running away from the trigger, confronting it. I remind you, free will reigns supreme, and their free will in this lifetime has caused the two of them to continue to not resolve the trauma of what necessitated these two souls to come back and work through this again in this incarnation. So that is the reading that I have for you guys on Chris Brown and Rihanna. I hope that you have found this video to be interesting, maybe thought-provoking and insightful. Please take what resonates and leave the rest behind. And as always, until next time, stay in the high vibration.